I always believed that real love was about showing up, not the flowers and fireworks kind, but the steady, boring, loyal kind. I showed up every day for my wife, Amanda. I worked overtime when the bills stacked up. I rubbed her feet after her nursing shifts. I remembered our anniversary when she didn't, and when her parents hit a rough patch and needed a place to stay. I opened our home to them, no questions asked. We'd met 8 years ago in the most cliché of ways, a mutual friend's barbecue. She was the loudest laugh at the party, bright and magnetic. I was quieter, the one manning the grill and keeping my circle small. She said I made the best ribs she'd ever tasted. I said she had sauce on her chin. We laughed. We danced. We fell hard and fast. The early years were sweet. Late-night takeout, cheap wine, spontaneous road trips. She told me she'd never met someone who made her feel so safe. I took that seriously. I wanted to be her safe place forever. We got married. 2 years later in a modest ceremony in a vineyard just outside Napa. Her parents, Rita and Carl, were already showing signs of financial strain by then. They didn't contribute to the wedding, but I didn't mind. I wanted Amanda to have her day, and I covered everything from the dress to the open bar. She was radiant that day, eyes full of hope, a smile that could have lit up the sun. But after the wedding, the tone of our relationship slowly began to shift. It wasn't overnight. It was more like erosion, quiet and steady. Her parents moved in 6 months after we married. Carl had lost his job in construction. Rita claimed a bad back made working impossible. They said it would be temporary. I believed them. Amanda swore they'd be gone in 3 months. 3 months turned into a year. Then another. They never paid rent. Never offered. They treated the guest room like a master suite and the fridge like their personal buffet. Rita criticized my cooking. Carl commandeered the living room TV for football season and snapped at me if I changed the channel. Amanda kept saying, they just need a little more time. I gave them time. I gave them space. I gave them everything. At first, I told myself I was being a good husband, that keeping Amanda happy meant tolerating her parents, no matter how invasive they became. But eventually, I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. I'd come home after a 10-hour shift only to find Carl parked in my recliner, feet up, beer in hand, or Rita gossiping on speakerphone in the kitchen while I tried to make dinner. I told Amanda we needed to set boundaries. She called me selfish. They're my family, she said. If you loved me, you'd understand. So I bit my tongue. Again, then came the secrecy. Amanda started working longer shifts, more girls' nights. She became glued to her phone. She'd angle the screen away from me. Text lit up at odd hours. When I asked who she was texting, she brushed me off. You're being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was observant and hurt and slowly drowning in a marriage that no longer felt like mine. I'll never forget the night I first realized something wasn't just off. It was broken. She came home at 2 a.m., hair messy, perfume fresh. Claimed she was just with Tasha and her phone had died. I knew she was lying. Tasha had texted me hours earlier she'd gone home at 10. When I confronted Amanda, she exploded. You're crazy. What? Now you're checking up on me like some insecure loser. I didn't yell back. I just stared at her. At the woman I once adored who now looked at me like a burden. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she told me to. Because I couldn't stand the weight of our bed anymore. The next few weeks were a slow descent into emotional frost. Conversations with Amanda became surface level, short and strained. She was either too tired to talk or too annoyed to care. If I asked about her day, I got a shrug. If I tried to be affectionate, I got flinches. Like I was something gross she had to tolerate. But what made it worse, what made it unbearable, was that I wasn't even allowed to feel upset. Anytime I voiced concern, she flipped it. You're just insecure. You're imagining things. God, stop being so needy. Suddenly, everything was my fault. I tried to be understanding. Told myself maybe it was stress. Maybe she was burnt out at work. Maybe her parents leaning on us for years was finally starting to weigh her down too. But no, she wasn't weighed down. She was checked out. I started noticing the little things first. She always kept her phone face down. She changed her phone passcode, something she hadn't done in 5 years. She started sleeping with it under her pillow. When I asked why, she claimed it was for her alarm. Even though we had a clock on the nightstand. Then came the half-truths. I'm going to a late shift, but I'd pass the hospital on my drive, and the lot would be empty. I'm having lunch with co-workers, but there were no takeout boxes, no receipts, no co-workers ever mentioned again. One time I found a receipt for a hotel room folded into her purse. She said she had to crash there with a nurse friend who missed the last bus. Said they just crashed for a few hours before morning rounds. It made no sense. None. But I nodded and let it go because that's what you do. When you're holding on to the last fraying threads of a relationship, I knew something was happening. I just didn't want to admit it. I started watching her parents more closely too. Carl had become emboldened in his freeloading. He made comments about my house as if he paid for the roof over our heads. Rita started making snide remarks when Amanda wasn't around, comments about real men who make real money and don't cry about dishes in the sink. They treated me like help. Sometimes I wondered if they knew. If Amanda had confided in them, or worse, if they were encouraging it. They were always whispering, always pausing their conversations when I entered the room. The loneliness hit differently when you were married to someone who no longer looked at you like you mattered. I started staying late at work just to avoid going home. I took on projects just to kill time. One evening, I came home early. Amanda wasn't expecting me. Her car was in the driveway. The lights were off, and I heard voices, one male, one hers, laughing, whispering. I crept to the window, heart pounding like war drums. There they were, her and some guy on our couch, her legs across his lap, his hand on her thigh, her giggling like she hadn't in years. My whole world cracked in that moment. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell. I didn't throw punches. I backed away, quietly, carefully. I went to my car, sat in the driveway, and stared at the steering wheel for a full hour. Then I drove off, not in rage, but in resolve. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted clarity. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at a friend's guest room. The next day, I started gathering evidence. Phone records, social media DMs, bank statements. I even installed a hidden camera in the living room. Within a week, I had everything I needed: timestamps, conversations, pictures. Amanda wasn't just cheating. She was living a whole other life. And I'd been footing the bill. But instead of confronting her, I planned. I didn't want a scene. I wanted justice. Quiet, calm, devastating justice. The hidden camera confirmed what my gut already knew. 3 days after I installed it, I sat alone in my office, watching footage that felt like it was shot in someone else's house. Amanda wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He walked in like he lived there, laughing, grabbing drinks from the fridge, planting kisses on her neck. They joked, they flirted. She called him babe. They sat on my couch, under my roof, while I was out earning the money that paid for it all. I paused the video and just stared. There was no more room for denial. No more maybe it's innocent. No more hoping she'd come around. This wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. Willful, repeated, cruel, and I was done. I printed everything, every text message I'd recovered from our cloud backups, every bank alert showing suspicious activity, hotel charges, gifts, transfers to an unknown Venmo name that, when I searched it, led me to the other man's public profile. I made copies, filed them neatly in a binder. Tabs, dates, highlights. When I met with my lawyer the following week, she didn't even look surprised. She's reckless, the lawyer said, flipping through the binder like it was a menu. This won't be hard. And as for her parents, since they were never on the lease, they've got no legal standing. That was the second time in a week my world shifted. The first was heartbreak. The second was power. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I didn't punch walls like you see in movies. I got quiet, focused, efficient. I opened new bank accounts, moved my direct deposits, froze the shared credit cards, changed every password she didn't already have memorized. I began documenting everything in the house: furniture, electronics, all the items I'd purchased before and during the marriage. I was meticulous. She liked to throw tantrums when she lost control, and I wasn't going to give her room to lie or twist the truth. It all felt surgical, clean, like I was extracting a tumor. The final confirmation came one night when I followed her car. I had no intention of confronting her. I just wanted the final nail. She pulled into a motel not even far from our neighborhood. The man met her in the lot. I recognized him from the footage. A lean guy with a smug walk and a sleeve of tattoos down one arm. She threw her arms around him like a lovesick teenager. And just like that, I turned the car around and drove home. No rage, no sorrow, only clarity. She'd chosen her path. Now it was time for me to walk mine with the facts, the law, and every ounce of dignity she thought she'd stripped from me. Once the decision was made, everything became mechanical, deliberate. I went from being the heartbroken husband to the executor of a plan, a quiet strategist. I didn't tell a soul. Not my coworkers, not my friends, not even my brother. The more people that knew, the more chance someone would tip her off. And I needed her blind. My lawyer drafted the divorce papers with all the supporting evidence photos, timestamps, digital records. We filed under adultery, which in our state gave me the leverage I needed. She also helped prepare a formal notice of eviction for her parents, effective immediately after Amanda was served. Since Carl and Rita were never on the lease, and I was the sole owner of the property, I could legally have them removed. All I needed was a proper 30-day written notice. But because of their behavior, verbal abuse, freeloading, and Amanda's affair, the lawyer helped me escalate it as a constructive breach of peace. In simple terms, they had no legal ground to stay. I took a few days off work, told them I had a family emergency. It wasn't a lie, something was dying. Just not in the way people usually imagine. The day the papers were served, I timed everything like a military operation. Amanda's work schedule showed she'd be on the floor from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. At 7:15 a.m., a professional process server knocked on the door of her hospital break room and handed her a neatly packed envelope, divorce papers, and inside, stapled to the back, a printed photo of her kissing her boyfriend on our couch. She called me exactly 5 minutes later. I didn't answer. At 7:30 a.m., movers arrived at the house. I met them at the curb with a list. They were efficient, professional. I had labeled every item that was mine, everything else I didn't care. By 9 a.m., I had changed the locks. The locksmith even chuckled when I told him why. At 9:30 a.m., I slid the eviction notice under the guest room door addressed to Carl and Rita. Printed in bold letters, it read, "You are to vacate the premises within 14 days. You are unauthorized tenants and no longer welcome. Legal action will be pursued if you remain." The look on Carl's face when he found it priceless. He stormed into the living room, waving the paper like it was a fake parking ticket. What the hell is this? I didn't flinch. I sat on the arm of the couch, arms crossed. It's exactly what it says. You've got 2 weeks to get out. You can't do this. Yes, I can. Rita chimed in from the hallway. We're family. No, you're freeloaders who knew exactly what Amanda was doing and let it happen under my roof. They stammered. They yelled. They tried to guilt me. I didn't budge. No yelling. No arguing. Just calm, firm silence. And that silence? It rattled them more than shouting ever could. Amanda showed up at the house around 8 p.m. that night. I heard her car screech into the driveway like a cop drama. She banged on the door until her hand must have gone numb. I opened it halfway. She looked disheveled, her mascara streaked. What the F*** is this? She hissed, holding the divorce papers. Exactly what it looks like. You're blowing everything up over one mistake. One mistake. I laughed. Amanda, you had another man in our home, in our bed. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Repeatedly, she started crying. Not the tears of regret, but the tears of someone who lost control. I didn't mean for this to happen. Yes, you did. You just didn't think I'd find out. And you sure as hell didn't think I'd walk away. She tried to step inside. I blocked her with the door. Also, your parents have been served. They've got 2 weeks to find somewhere else to sponge off. Her face twisted. They have nowhere to go. Not my problem anymore. You're heartless. No, Amanda, I'm done. And with that, I closed the door in her face. For the first time in years, I felt free. The first 3 days after the notice were oddly quiet. Carl barely spoke. Rita sulked around the house, packing slowly, throwing occasional jabs under her breath like, guess loyalty doesn't mean anything anymore. I ignored it. I wasn't interested in arguing with people who had drained my life for years. Amanda, on the other hand, texted constantly. First came the denial. We can work through this. Please don't make any rash decisions. Then came the guilt. You're tearing our family apart. My parents are old. They'll be homeless. Then the insults. You're pathetic. No real man kicks out his in-laws. I didn't reply to a single message. Silence was my final act of dignity. A week later, the moving truck showed up for Carl and Rita. They hadn't found a permanent place, just a temporary extended stay motel across town. Carl refused to hire movers, so he roped in an old drinking buddy and a dolly with one bad wheel. Watching them stumble around with boxes they never helped unpack in the first place felt like justice in motion. Rita had the audacity to cry, not from sadness, but from entitlement. I gave Amanda everything growing up. This is how you repay us. No, I said. She repaid you by burning everything down. I'm just cleaning up the ashes. She muttered something about ungrateful men and slammed the car door. Carl didn't say goodbye. Fine by me. By the time they pulled out of the driveway, I felt like a fog had lifted. The silence in the house wasn't cold anymore, it was calm. Mine. Amanda showed up the next day. She didn't knock this time. Just stood in the yard like a statue, watching me through the living room window while I ate breakfast. It took everything in me not to feel sorry for her, but then I remembered the smirks, the secrecy, the betrayal she brought into my home. I stepped outside. "Don't," I said before she could speak. "You don't live here anymore." Her voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my concern." "I made a mistake. You made a pattern." She took a step forward. "I was lonely. You were always working. I was working to pay for the house your parents leached off of, and the life you destroyed." She started, crying again. Real tears this time, maybe. Or maybe just tears of a woman who was losing her safety net. "I never thought you'd go through with this." "That's the problem," I said, turning toward the door. "You never thought I'd value myself enough to walk away." I didn't slam the door. I didn't lock it dramatically. I just closed it, gently, because the best revenge isn't rage. It's peace, people talk. Especially when a marriage explodes like a car crash in the middle of a quiet suburban street. At first, the calls and messages came from Amanda's side, her friends, her aunts, even a few of her cousins. "Is this true? She said you kicked her parents out with no warning. She's devastated, man. Can't you work it out?" I didn't respond to any of them. I let the silence do the talking. Then came the shift. Two of her co-workers reached out a week later, people I'd barely spoken to at hospital parties or awkward dinners. One of them sent a message that stuck with me. "I don't know if you need to hear this, but a lot of us knew something wasn't right. You deserve better." It surprised me. I didn't realize how many people saw what I refused to for years. Then came the apologies from people who once took Amanda's side. Her best friend, Tasha, showed up at my work one day. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I thought you were controlling." That's what she told us. But now, it's all making sense. I didn't ask for apologies, but I accepted them anyway. They weren't for me. They were for the version of me I buried while trying to be the husband Amanda wanted. I started going back to the gym, joined a book club, of all things. Started having dinners with my brother again. Little things that made me feel human again, like I had a pulse, not just a roll. There were still moments when it stung, like when I found her necklace behind the dresser, or when I walked past the bakery where we used to pick up pastries on Sunday mornings. But the pain was no longer sharp. It was a dull ache. Manageable. Amanda tried to come back twice. Once, she emailed me a long, rambling letter. Said she missed my stability. Said she didn't love him, she just felt trapped and didn't know how else to breathe. The second time, she sent a photo of the first apartment she toured on her own. It's small. Nothing like what we had. I get it now. I didn't reply. She wasn't reaching out for love. She was reaching out for rescue. And I'd retired my cape. One afternoon, I ran into Carl at the grocery store. He looked older, smaller, like someone had let the air out of him. He avoided my eyes, grabbed a six-pack, and left out. Rita, I heard, was staying with a cousin out of state. Last I knew, she was blaming everything on Amanda's poor choices and men. Typical. I didn't care anymore. There were chapters in a book I'd finally closed, and for the first time in years, I was writing something new on my own terms. It took nearly a year before I started to feel free. Not just legally, emotionally, spiritually. Like I had walked out of a burning house and didn't even realize how bad the smoke was until I tasted clean air again. I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't looking to win the breakup by flaunting a new relationship or pretending everything was perfect. I took time to sit with myself, to ask the hard questions. Why had I stayed so long? Why had I let disrespect go unchecked for years? Why did I try so hard to fix a marriage I didn't break? The answers weren't easy, but they were honest. And with each truth, I shed a layer of who I used to be. I spent weekends hiking again, volunteered at a local shelter once a month. I even started learning how to cook real food, not just survival meals for work nights. That's how I met Leah. She was volunteering at the same shelter, organizing food donations. We bumped into each other trying to stock the same shelf. Literally cans everywhere. She laughed. I apologized. She handed me a soup can and said, "That one's actually the worst flavor. Trade you for chili." That was it. Nothing flashy, just easy. We talked, then kept talking. It wasn't fireworks. It was steady, warm. No games. No secrets. Just someone who listened and laughed and made me feel seen, not needed, not tolerated, seen. I didn't tell her about Amanda right away. But when I did, she didn't pity me. She nodded and said, "Sounds like you finally stood up for yourself." That's when I realized I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the man who left, the man who let go, the man who evicted everything toxic from his life. right down at the last parasite on his couch. Amanda reached out one last time. It was a text, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message for a while, then I deleted it. Because I was. Not because I found someone new. Not because I got revenge. But because I finally remembered who I was before I let someone convince me I was less. The house is quieter now, cleaner, lighter. Every room has space to breathe again. And every morning, I wake up alone, not lonely, just peaceful. There are no slammed doors, no muttered insults, no heavy tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Just sunlight. Just silence. Just mine. And that's more than I ever thought I'd have again.